I am such a fan. It is really cool to chat with you today.
Great.
I'm really curious about the fact that David Raymer's story started your journey for this documentary. At what point did you realize what this movie was going to become?
Well, I realized pretty early that it couldn't just be the David Reimer Dr. Money story. That's kind of what took this film so long from the time it was first like a seed of a thing, which was 5 years ago now, until coming out, because I was like, that story is so amazing. It feels so relevant to our conversation about gender today. And yet I don't think we could make a film just about that story, because it would be so depressing that no one would want to see it. Like, it's just too, and also it would be really hard to do because everyone who's involved in it is no longer living. So like, where do you go? How do you have a story where it's like, and then, and then like, I mean, the film mentions David's suicide. His twin brother also killed himself. It was a drug overdose, so it's not entirely clear whether it was a literal suicide, but whatever, it's all very sad. Their mom died, their dad died, Dr. Money's died. So, it was just a question of like how, but I still found the story really fascinating and wanted to get into more of it. I watched the field tapes from that interview. There's a lot that's in the film that it wasn't in the original Dateline story, but it's in the field tape. And you see David Reimer explaining that the whole reason that he's talking is that he's concerned about how his case has been misinterpreted and used to justify medically unnecessary surgeries on intersex children. He literally said that in his interview 25 years ago. And to hear those words from him after his death, it just seemed like it was sort of like his idea almost, I guess. And that led me to look to the modern intersex rights movement. And that led me to the three amazing people that became kind of the central figures of the film.
Did you get a sense in doing this? I mean, we have these core people who are at the center of the story, but did you get a sense for how widespread these stories are in America? I mean, you have a number at the beginning of the film, but did you hear a lot of stories?
Yes, I've certainly heard other stories, and honestly, even since the film isn't even out yet, but since the trailer's out, I'm hearing from a lot more people. People are reaching out to me directly on like my DMs and Twitter and Instagram. There are people out there, and they are eager for the intersex experience to be represented on camera.
That's amazing. I mean, could a series come out of this, even if it's for TV or otherwise for film?
I don't know what to say about that. I mean, I certainly think, I don't think I am the last person or should be the last person to be telling intersex stories. Like, this is just a whole segment of the population, and to have an interesting story to tell. And I hope that there's more, that we're not just, the three people in my film are amazing examples of activism. There also are intersex people who aren't activists. There are people that have been activists earlier on that kind of burnt out from it, because it is very, just like talking activists fighting sexual assault, talking about their own sexual assaults. There's just like there's a cost to talking so personally about one's body repeatedly. So
the other side of this is the conversations with River, Alicia, and Sean. I mean, they speak so well about this. It feels like they must have had an incredibly safe space to talk about this. How do you make a space like that? And did you have to convince them to have these conversations?
Yeah, I think part of it was really just the selection of who they were. I mean, I have a slight concern that people are going to come away with this film like, oh, are all intersex people like beautiful geniuses? These are all three people who've sort of been thinking about these issues for some time, who've worked through some of their issues. Not that it isn't still like a source of trauma. And my main concern actually had to do with the whole documentary filming experience. Like, because crew people are often really busy. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of heavy equipment they're lugging around. Like, I really selected who was going to be on the crew for like human kindness above all else, including even experience level, just wanting people who I thought would have a good vibe with people. The way those interviews were done, what we used all natural light. I didn't want bright light shining on people. I've actually been on both sides of the camera now in my job as like promoting my own films. The worst thing in the world is a situation where people are shining, you can't even see the person because there's this horrible bright light. Yes, I know you look better that way, but I'm like, we're gonna set like no artificial lights. Like, we'll find a room that has good light that can face the person. We had the crew set everything up and then actually go into another room where they were doing focus, and I was the person standing behind the camera. I actually did a film 6 or 7 years ago that I shot all myself, and I thought I got incredibly good personal stuff. Unfortunately, I'm terrible cinematographer, so it didn't look very good. But I was like, I want to come close to that, but without me having to shoot this film. So a lot of it was that, and I think just spending time with people and listening. I mean, in my day-to-day life, I'm maybe not as good a listener as I'd like to be. I'm more of a talker, but when I'm doing my job, I do listen to people and let them say what they need to say. Occasionally come in to ask another question or to say, to keep going with it, tell me more about that. But like, somehow I restrain my inclination to not shut up.
Well, I also think that, just speaking about the fact that that couch in the middle of that space, that garden, is such a natural place for this conversation that it's not something you normally think about, but it was such a wonderful
That's so funny.
space.
No, that was a COVID thing, and that was something that we filmed we filmed at the very end to get everyone together, and it was supposed to be filmed in a whole different place. And then one of our people had a COVID scare. It was days later, and they were still testing negatively, but we weren't sure. And this was a year and a half ago, so we're being more cautious. So that was like the backyard of our producer's friend. And we were like, I don't know, let's stick this. Actually, River's joke was that it looked like Oprah's house in Montecito. But just created that whole vibe.
It's a great vibe. I mean, it worked out very well. The story that they each tell, their stories, and the way they inform this conversation about gender and identity, and how it feels like we're hopefully on the cusp of change. But did you get a sense that even Erica's story, which had some hope to it, but also some negative aspects as well,
right? But
did you get a sense that there is more hope now than there was before?
Yeah, I mean, I think unlike a lot of movements where you feel like it's all kind of hopeless, I think the intersex rights question is one where we are on the cusp of change. I actually think if people were more educated about what was really going on and rethought it for a few minutes, because I'm coming to this from the outside, and when you're like, wait, what are we doing? That doesn't like that, and maybe that's part of the reason that the participants in the film and I got not that I agree with them 100% necessarily on everything they're advocating for, but overall, there's something they're fighting for. I think they're right, and I let them know that. And I'd like to help, move things in a direction where there's more thoughtful consideration of the needs of intersex people when it comes to their own medical treatment. I want to add one more thing just on the sort of getting people comfortable front. I did bring in a consulting producer on this film who is intersex. Interesting coincidence, just the young woman who had interviewed for our RBG film, because she's one of the co-authors of the notorious RBG book, before we started filming on this, came out in Teen Vogue as intersex. Sort of proving the point that there are more intersex people out there than most people realize. And I just reached out to her and said, Shauna, I'm actually working on a big intersex project. Would you be interested in in joining, and she was very great and very thoughtful in kind of giving me some parameters about what issues to look out for, what to stay away from, how to talk to people.
That's fantastic. Well, the last thing I want to know is, you've worked with NBC News for this. I know you've obviously worked with them before. What are they like as a partner in telling a story like this that maybe we wouldn't expect to see this kind of story come from an association with them?
Yeah, it was great. It was great working with NBC. They have a really well-defined kind of well-oiled machine production apparatus that's like bigger and better and smoother than what you have in most of the indie doc world. So it was really great to be back working with them on the sort of tech side and like on the logistics side. Like they're just like there are things that are actually quite, I was Dateline producer for a long time. Things work quite smoothly in a situation where you're at some point, the period that I was working there, we were on 5 nights a week. Like you're producing 5 hours of television a week with a lot of people. Like you get some pretty good logistics going. So that was great. Molly O'Brien, who was one of the people who brought this in, and Liz Cole, who was a boss of mine at Dateline and sort of the top exec on this, are just really thoughtful, smart people. It's very different. It's a very different tone and vibe than what we worked on at Dateline, but like they're people with whom I have like just like a lot of trust and understanding, and like we know each other well enough that they were really willing to, I would say, sort of just trust me to like, oh, I've got an idea for this. I think it could really work. Like, what do you think? And they just sort of like let me go for it, and that was great.
That's amazing. Well, just to finish it up, do you have something else that you're working on now? I mean, sure, this is still your focus, but are there other things in the works?
Yeah, no, I'm like in development mode, both individually and with Betsy. We're also sort of pursuing some of our like amazing women stories that have really had so much meaning for people, and that there are so many stories left to tell. So we've got a couple of those that we're pursuing. I do also have some individual stuff that I'm pursuing. So, but it is a complicated time in the doc world. So right now, very focused on trying to get people to theaters to see this film, and then hopefully within the next few months, I'll have another production up and running.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for the time. It's a huge pleasure to chat with you.
Very nice to meet you.